Could this bruised and battered woman truly be the answer to his lonely prayers? Dust swirled around Jedidiah, coating his worn boots and the edges of his anticipation as the stagecoach rumbled into Promise Creek. He'd envisioned this day for months, picturing a rosy-cheeked bride, eager to start a new life on his sprawling, solitary ranch. Instead, what stepped out was a figure that made his calloused hands clench. A woman, gaunt and disheveled, her delicate features marred by an angry bruise blossoming beneath one eye. Her dress, once perhaps a hopeful blue, was now streaked with dirt and despair. The other passengers, a mix of weathered prospectors and stern-faced matrons, offered no comfort, their gazes a blend of pity and suspicion. This was not the image etched into the pages of the matrimonial gazette, nor the dream that had sustained him through countless sunrises and sunsets alone on the prairie. He'd sent good money, honest intentions, and a promise of a safe haven across a continent. Now, faced with this broken woman, a dark wave of doubt crashed over him. Yet beneath the shock and disappointment, a flicker of something else ignited, a primal sense of protectiveness, a spark of the lone wolf recognizing a wounded creature in need. He saw the tremble in her hands, the way she flinched as if expecting a blow, and a silent vow began to form in the depths of his solitary heart. Her name, the driver mumbled, was Eliza. She looked up, her eyes wide and bruised, meeting Jedidiah's gaze. There was no joy, no relief, only a profound weariness that settled deep within her bones. The bustling energy of Promise Creek, the scent of wood smoke and horses, the distant cries of a peddler, it all blurred into an oppressive hum. She was a bird with broken wings, dropped into a harsh landscape, and the man before her, with his weathered face and quiet strength, was an unknown variable in her equation of survival. Her mail-order dream had already become a nightmare, and she braced herself for whatever fresh torment awaited. Jedidiah, his voice gruff but surprisingly gentle, cut through the din. "You're coming with me." He didn't ask. He stated it, a simple declaration that held both command and a strange, unexpected offer of sanctuary. The words hung in the dusty air, a lifeline thrown to a drowning soul, or perhaps a new kind of chain. Eliza hesitated, her gaze sweeping over the judgmental faces around them, then back to the stoic rancher. There was nowhere else to go, no one else to turn to. With a silent, desperate nod, she surrendered to her fate, whatever it may be. The journey to the ranch was long and silent, broken only by the creak of the wagon wheels and the distant call of a lone coyote, a sound that echoed the emptiness in Eliza's heart. Every jolt of the wagon sent a fresh throb of pain through her bruised body. Each shadow stretching across the vast prairie seemed to harbor unseen threats. She kept her gaze fixed on the horizon, desperate to avoid Jedidiah's eyes, terrified of what he might see, or what he might demand. The image of the brutal men who had ambushed the stage, their faces a blur of cruelty, flashed in her mind, sending shivers down her spine. Jedidiah, for his part, struggled with a tempest of emotions. Anger simmered at the injustice done to this woman, suspicion gnawed at him regarding the circumstances of her injuries, and a profound sense of responsibility settled heavily on his shoulders. He was a man of the land, used to taming wild horses and coaxing life from stubborn soil. But this situation was entirely new. He stole glances at Eliza, noting the way she flinched, the haunted look in her eyes. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his gut, that his life, and hers, had just taken an unforeseen and perilous turn. The ranch, when they finally arrived, was a cluster of rough-hewn buildings silhouetted against a breathtaking sunset that painted the sky in hues of orange and deep violet, reminiscent of the vibrant patterns on a Navajo blanket. It was isolated, vast, and undeniably beautiful, but to Eliza, it felt like the edge of the world. Jedidiah dismounted first, his movements fluid and strong, and then offered a hand to help her down. His touch, though calloused, was surprisingly gentle, sending a jolt through her weary body. She expected him to question, to demand explanations, but he simply led her towards the small, sturdy cabin that would now be her home. Inside, the cabin was sparsely furnished but surprisingly clean, with a roaring fire in the hearth that cast dancing shadows on the walls. The scent of pine and something vaguely herbal filled the air. He gestured towards a rough-hewn table laden with a simple meal: stew, fresh-baked bread, and strong coffee. "Eat," he rumbled, his voice still low. Eliza stared at the food, her stomach churning with a mixture of fear and a hunger she hadn't realized was so profound. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken questions and untold stories. As she ate slowly at first, then with increasing urgency, she felt his gaze upon her, not intrusive or demanding, but watchful. He sat across from her, nursing a mug of coffee, his features softened by the firelight. The anger in his eyes had receded, replaced by a quiet intensity that was both unsettling and, strangely, a little comforting. She felt an invisible thread begin to form between them, woven from shared silence and the unspoken understanding that they were both, in their own ways, adrift in a harsh, unforgiving world. Days bled into weeks, each one a slow, measured dance of unspoken communication. Eliza, still wary, found solace in the routine of ranch life. She tended a small garden, its vibrant green shoots a stark contrast to the muted browns of the prairie, a tiny oasis of hope. Jedidiah, observing her from a distance, noticed the way she nurtured the fledgling plants, her delicate hands surprisingly adept. He saw the resilience beneath the surface of her fear, a flicker of inner strength that reminded him of the enduring spirit of the wild mustangs that roamed the plains. He, in turn, worked the land with a silent determination, mending fences, herding cattle, his body a testament to years of arduous labor. He rarely spoke, but his presence was a constant, solid anchor in Eliza's turbulent world. She began to notice the small kindnesses: a fresh bucket of water left by her door, a perfectly ripe apple placed on the kitchen table, the way he always seemed to know when she needed to be alone. These quiet gestures, more potent than any words, slowly began to chip away at the fortress she had built around her heart. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery streaks, Eliza found herself watching Jedidiah as he sharpened an axe, his muscles rippling under his worn shirt. The scene was primal, powerful, and utterly captivating. A feeling she couldn't name, a mixture of awe and something akin to safety, stirred within her. She realized, with a jolt, that the ranch was no longer just a place of refuge. It was becoming, slowly but surely, a home, and the silent rancher, a protector. The arrival of a traveling peddler broke the quiet rhythm of their days. He brought news from the outside world, gossip from nearby towns, and a trunk full of trinkets and necessities. Jedidiah, ever the stoic, haggled for supplies, while Eliza, drawn by a pang of longing for something beautiful, lingered by the peddler's display of colorful ribbons and delicate lace. Her gaze, however, settled on a small tarnished silver locket. It was simple, unassuming, yet something about its forgotten elegance called to her. Jedidiah, noticing her lingering stare, surprised her by purchasing the locket. He handed it to her without a word, his expression unreadable. Eliza's fingers trembled as she clasped the cool metal. It was the first gift he had given her, a tangible acknowledgement of her presence, of her budding individuality. A warmth spread through her chest, chasing away some of the lingering chill of her past. It was a small gesture, but it felt monumental, a tiny crack appearing in the wall between them. Later that evening, as she polished the locket by the flickering lamplight, Eliza felt a strange stirring within her. She had been so consumed by fear and survival, she had almost forgotten the simple pleasure of owning something beautiful, something just for her. The locket became a symbol, not just of Jedidiah's quiet kindness, but of a tiny, fragile hope beginning to blossom in the desolate landscape of her heart. One crisp autumn morning, a group of Native American riders, members of the local Cheyenne tribe, appeared on the horizon, their horses moving with a silent grace that spoke of deep respect for the land. Jedidiah, without a moment's hesitation, walked out to meet them, his hand raised in a gesture of peace. Eliza watched, her heart pounding, remembering the stories she'd heard, the fear instilled in settlers about savages. But Jedidiah's demeanor was calm, respectful, and the interaction, though brief, was one of mutual understanding. The lead rider, an elder with wise, weathered eyes, spoke in a language Eliza didn't understand, but she sensed a quiet exchange of information, a shared awareness of the rhythms of the land. Jedidiah offered them water and some tobacco, and after a moment of quiet contemplation, the riders turned and vanished as silently as they had appeared, leaving only the memory of their powerful presence and the scent of sage in the air. This encounter shattered another of Eliza's preconceived notions. It was then that Jedidiah, sensing her lingering apprehension, spoke of the tribe, of their history with the land, and of the fragile peace he had worked to maintain. His words were not just an explanation, but an invitation, a gentle pulling back of the curtain on his world, a world where survival often depended on understanding, not just strength. Eliza listened, truly listened, and with each word, another layer of her fear began to peel away, replaced by a growing understanding of the intricate tapestry of life on the prairie. A harsh winter descended upon the ranch, trapping them in a world of snow and biting winds. The isolation, once a source of Eliza's fear, now became a strange kind of comfort. They were forced into closer proximity, sharing the warmth of the hearth, the quiet rhythm of daily chores. Jedidiah, usually so reserved, began to tell stories of his youth, of growing up on the vast plains, of the challenges and triumphs of carving a life out of the wilderness. His voice, deep and resonant, filled the cabin, painting vivid pictures in Eliza's mind. Eliza, in turn, found herself slowly, tentatively, sharing snippets of her own past, though she carefully skirted the painful details of her journey and the bruises that were slowly fading from her skin. She spoke of her childhood, of the simple joys she had once known, of the books she had loved to read. In these shared moments, a bridge began to form between them, built not just on necessity, but on a nascent understanding, a burgeoning connection that transcended the silence. The raw edges of their initial meeting began to soften, smoothed by the quiet companionship of shared solitude. The blizzards raged outside, but inside, a different kind of warmth began to grow. Eliza found herself studying Jedidiah, noticing the lines around his eyes that crinkled when he smiled, the strength in his hands as he mended a saddle, the quiet concern in his gaze when she shivered. The ranch, once a lonely outpost, now felt less like a prison and more like a sanctuary, a refuge from a world that had dealt her so many blows. One evening, while reading by the fire, Eliza noticed a faded photograph tucked into an old Bible Jedidiah sometimes read. It was a picture of a woman, her face gentle and kind, with a smile that hinted at a deep inner peace. Eliza, emboldened by their growing comfort, asked, "Who is she?" Jedidiah's gaze softened, a hint of sorrow clouding his eyes. "My wife," he said simply. "Sarah. She died of consumption 5 years ago." The words hung in the air, revealing a profound grief that he carried with a quiet dignity. A wave of unexpected empathy washed over Eliza. She saw not just a stoic rancher, but a man who had loved deeply and lost profoundly. The silence that followed was different from their usual quiet. It was a silence filled with understanding, a shared acknowledgement of loss. It was a moment of vulnerability, a crack in Jedidiah's carefully constructed wall, and Eliza, instinctively, reached out and gently placed her hand on his. It was the first physical contact they had shared beyond the necessities of daily life, a small gesture that spoke volumes. In that moment, a profound shift occurred. The ghost of Sarah, rather than being a barrier, became a bridge, connecting them in a shared understanding of pain and resilience. Eliza realized that Jedidiah wasn't just a potential husband, he was a human being, with a history, with sorrow, with a capacity for love. The idea of a future with him, once a terrifying unknown, now began to hold a fragile, tentative promise of healing. As spring began to tentatively bloom, bringing with it the promise of new life, so too did a new understanding blossom between Jedidiah and Eliza. They found themselves spending more time together, not just out of necessity, but out of a growing desire for each other's company. They rode out to check the fences, the vast landscape stretching before them, wild and untamed. Eliza, initially timid, grew more confident on horseback, feeling the wind in her hair, the freedom of movement a balm to her soul. Jedidiah would point out distant landmarks, tell her the names of the wildflowers that dotted the prairie, and share stories of the animals that roamed their land. Eliza, in turn, would listen intently, her questions revealing a keen intelligence and a thirst for knowledge. She found herself laughing more easily, a sound that, at first, felt foreign, but now bubbled up naturally, a testament to the slow mending of her spirit. The ranch, once a symbol of her forced new life, was gradually becoming a place where she could truly begin to live again. One afternoon, while fixing a broken fence post, Jedidiah stumbled, his hand catching on a loose piece of barbed wire. A deep gash appeared on his forearm, crimson blood welling up. Eliza, seeing his pained expression, immediately rushed to his side. Without a moment's hesitation, she tore a strip from her petticoat and, with surprising steadiness, began to bind his wound. Her touch was firm, yet gentle, her brow furrowed with concern. Jedidiah, usually so self-reliant, found himself leaning into her care, a vulnerability he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. He watched her hands, so delicate yet so capable, as she meticulously cleaned and bandaged his arm. In that moment of shared vulnerability, a profound sense of trust, deeper than any words, solidified between them. He saw not just a damaged woman, but a woman of immense strength and compassion, a true partner. As she finished, her gaze met his, and in her eyes he saw not pity, but a quiet strength, a genuine concern that mirrored his own burgeoning feelings. The unspoken question that had lingered between them since her arrival seemed to dissolve, replaced by a certainty that was both comforting and exhilarating. Their shared history, once a story of trauma and loneliness, was slowly transforming into a narrative of resilience, healing, and a burgeoning connection that transcended their difficult beginnings. One clear, star-filled night, as they sat by the fire, the vast expanse of the prairie stretching out beyond their cabin, Jedidiah finally spoke the words that had been building within him. "Eliza," he began, his voice deeper than usual, "I know this ain't how you pictured things, but I want you to stay, not just as a necessity, but as my wife." He watched her face, his heart pounding in his chest, a mixture of hope and fear twisting in his gut. Eliza's breath hitched. The words, so simple, yet so profound, echoed in the quiet night. She thought of the journey, the bruises, the despair, and then of the quiet kindnesses, the shared silences, the slowly mending parts of her soul. She looked into his eyes, seeing not just the lonely rancher, but the man who had offered her sanctuary, protection, and a quiet, unwavering respect. Her own heart, once a bruised and guarded fortress, now felt a stirring of something akin to joy. A soft smile, one that reached her eyes and banished the last shadows of her past, graced her lips. "Yes, Jedidiah," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but filled with a newfound certainty. "I'll stay." The simple words, spoken under the vast, ancient sky, sealed a promise, not just of a shared future, but of a bond forged in hardship, tempered by kindness, and illuminated by the enduring power of hope. The wedding was a simple affair, witnessed only by the vast sky and the distant silent mountains. Jedidiah had fashioned a ring for Eliza from a bent nail, crude but filled with a sincerity that brought tears to her eyes. That night, their union was sealed not with passion born of haste, but with a gentle tenderness, a quiet exploration of two souls who had found their harbor in one another. Eliza, who had feared the touch of a man, discovered in Jedidiah's arms a safety and a reverence she never thought possible. Their days settled into a comfortable rhythm, a partnership built on mutual respect and a deep, unspoken affection. Jedidiah taught Eliza to shoot, her aim surprisingly steady, her determination impressing him. In turn, Eliza brought a softness to the harsh edges of his life, filling the cabin with the scent of wildflowers and the sound of her humming as she worked. The lonely ranch was lonely no more. It was a home, filled with the quiet strength of their shared existence. But the West was a land of ghosts, and Eliza's past was not yet ready to release its hold on her. One afternoon, a lone rider approached the ranch. It was the sheriff from Promise Creek, his face grim. He carried a wanted poster, and on it was a crude sketch of a man, but the name underneath made Eliza's blood run cold: Silas Blackwood. It was the name of the man who had orchestrated the stagecoach robbery, the man whose cruel face was burned into her memory. The sheriff explained that Blackwood and his gang had been terrorizing the territory, leaving a trail of violence in their wake. They were last seen heading in the direction of the outlying ranches. He warned Jedidiah to be vigilant, to keep his rifle close. As the sheriff rode away, a palpable tension settled over the ranch, a dark cloud obscuring the fragile peace they had built. Eliza felt the old fear, a cold serpent coiling in her stomach. Jedidiah saw the terror in her eyes, the way her hands trembled. He placed his large, calloused hand over hers. "You're safe here," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "I won't let anyone harm you." His words were a promise, a bulwark against the encroaching darkness. But Eliza knew that men like Silas Blackwood were not easily deterred. They were predators who thrived on fear and delighted in destruction. That night, sleep offered no respite. Every creak of the cabin, every rustle of the wind, sent a jolt of panic through her. She found herself back on that dusty road, the screams of the passengers, the glint of steel, the searing pain of a blow. The past, which she had so carefully tried to bury, was clawing its way back to the surface, threatening to shatter the new life she had so carefully, so hopefully, begun to build. Days turned into a week of watchful waiting. Jedidiah became a silent sentinel, his rifle never far from his side, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. He patrolled the perimeter of their land, his movements deliberate and focused. The ease they had found with one another was replaced by a shared anxiety, a silent understanding of the threat that lurked just beyond their sight. Eliza, determined not to be a helpless victim, insisted on practicing with the rifle every day. The powerful kickback of the gun against her shoulder was a jarring but empowering sensation. She learned to load, aim, and fire with a grim efficiency, the sharp crack of the rifle echoing across the prairie, a declaration of her refusal to be broken. She would not be the same terrified woman who had stepped off that stagecoach. One evening, as twilight bled across the sky, they spotted a flicker of firelight in the distant hills. It was too far to be a neighbor, too deliberate to be a lightning strike. A cold dread settled in Jedidiah's gut. "They're here," he said softly, his voice devoid of all but a steely resolve. He looked at Eliza, her face pale but her eyes firm. "Stay inside. Bar the door. No matter what you hear." Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs, but she nodded, her fear overshadowed by a fierce protectiveness for the life they had built. She watched as Jedidiah disappeared into the deepening shadows, a solitary figure moving with the quiet grace of a predator hunting his own ground. She barricaded the door, the heavy wooden bar thudding into place like the final beat of a drum, and took her position by the window, rifle in hand. The night grew unnaturally quiet, the familiar sounds of the prairie, the crickets, the distant coyote, all silenced. It was the pregnant pause before a storm, a stillness that was more terrifying than any noise. Hours crawled by, each second stretching into an eternity. Eliza's knuckles were white as she gripped the rifle, her ears straining for any sound, any sign of Jedidiah's return. Then, a sudden, sharp crack of a rifle shot shattered the silence, followed by another, and then a volley of shouts and gunfire. The battle had begun. Eliza's breath caught in her throat, a prayer forming on her lips. She could only wait, trapped in the suffocating darkness of the cabin, her imagination painting horrific scenes in the shadows. The sounds of the fight, a brutal symphony of violence, seemed to go on forever, each shot a blow against her heart. Suddenly, the firing stopped. The silence that descended was absolute, heavy, and terrifying. Eliza waited, her body rigid with tension. She didn't know if the silence meant victory or defeat. Then, she heard a soft, scraping sound at the door. Her blood ran cold. "Jedidiah," she whispered, her voice trembling. There was no answer. The scraping grew louder, more insistent. A man's guttural laugh echoed from the other side. Little bird, let me in!" A voice she recognized with sickening clarity sneered. It was Silas Blackwood. "Your man put up a good fight, a real good fight. Now it's your turn to entertain me." Panic seized her, cold and absolute. Jedidiah was gone. She was alone. But then, another emotion surged through her, hot and powerful. Rage. Rage at this man who had taken everything, who sought to destroy the one good thing she had found in this harsh world. Clutching her rifle, she stared at the door, the wood groaning under the force of a man trying to break it down. She would not be a victim. Not again. She raised the rifle, the heavy steel cool against her cheek, and aimed it squarely at the door. The door splintered, a rough-hewn boot kicking it open. Silas Blackwood stood silhouetted in the doorway, a cruel smirk on his face, his eyes glinting in the moonlight. He took a step inside, confident, predatory. "There you are," he rasped, his gaze sweeping over her. He didn't see the rifle at first, blinded by his own arrogance. That was his final mistake. With a cry that was part fear, part fury, Eliza pulled the trigger. The explosion rocked the small cabin, the flash momentarily blinding her. Blackwood staggered back, a look of pure shock on his face, a dark stain blossoming on his chest. He collapsed to the ground, the life fading from his malevolent eyes. For a moment, Eliza just stood there, the rifle smoking in her hands, the smell of gunpowder thick in the air. Then, a figure stumbled through the broken doorway behind Blackwood's body. It was Jedidiah, bloodied and bruised, clutching a wound in his side, but alive. He looked from the dead man on the floor to Eliza, a mixture of awe and profound relief on his face. "Eliza," he breathed, before his legs gave out and he slumped against the doorframe. Adrenaline surged through Eliza, pushing aside her shock and fear. She rushed to Jedidiah's side, her medical knowledge, gleaned from old books and practical necessity, taking over. She helped him to the bed, her hands surprisingly steady as she cut away his shirt to reveal a nasty but not fatal wound. The bullet had passed clean through his side. For the next few days, Eliza became his nurse, his protector. She cleaned and dressed his wound, brewed him herbal teas to fight the fever, and sat by his side, her rifle always within reach. The roles had reversed. The protected had become the protector. In those quiet hours, as she tended to him, a new depth of love, forged in violence and sealed in loyalty, bloomed between them. Jedidiah watched her, his gaze filled with a love so profound it hurt to breathe. He had known she was resilient, but he had never imagined the core of steel that lay within her. She had not only faced her demon, she had vanquished him. She had saved them both. The bruised and broken woman he had met at the stagecoach was gone, replaced by a warrior, a survivor, his wife. When the sheriff and his posse finally arrived, drawn by rumors of the gunfight, they found a scene of quiet order. The bodies of Blackwood's gang were buried in unmarked graves, and Jedidiah was already on his feet, his arms slung around Eliza's shoulders. The sheriff looked from the healing rancher to the quiet, resolute woman beside him and simply tipped his hat in a gesture of profound respect. The bounty on Blackwood's head was a small fortune, enough to secure their future, to buy more cattle, and to make the ranch the haven they had both dreamed of. But the money meant little compared to what they had truly gained. They had faced the darkness together and emerged stronger, their bond unbreakable, their love for each other as vast and enduring as the prairie itself. Life on the ranch returned to its peaceful rhythm, but it was a different kind of peace. It was not the peace of isolation, but the peace of security, of knowing they could face whatever challenges the untamed West threw at them, as long as they faced them together. The ghosts of the past had been laid to rest, not by forgetting, but by confronting them with courage and love. One spring morning, a year later, Eliza stood on the porch, a gentle breeze rustling her hair. The garden was in full bloom, a riot of color against the green plains. Jedidiah came up behind her, wrapping his strong arms around her waist. She leaned back against his chest, a soft smile on her face. The bruises were long gone, replaced by the healthy glow of happiness and peace. She placed his hand on her slightly rounded belly. "He's kicking," she whispered, her voice filled with a quiet joy that made Jedidiah's heart swell. He pressed his cheek against hers, his gaze sweeping over the land that was their home, their legacy. They had weathered the harshest storms, both from the land and from the hearts of cruel men. The future stretched before them, as wide and full of promise as the horizon. It would hold hardships, they knew, for that was the nature of the West. But it would also hold love, laughter, and the quiet strength of a family forged in the crucible of adversity. Their story was no longer just about survival. It was about triumph. Their story became a quiet legend whispered among the few travelers who passed through Promise Creek, a tale of a bruised mail-order bride and the silent rancher who saw beyond her pain to the strength within. It was a testament to the enduring human spirit, to the power of kindness, and to the unpredictable, beautiful tapestry of life in the old American West. They were a symbol of the promise the land held, that even the most broken of souls could find healing and a home under the vast, unwavering sky. Jedidiah looked at Eliza, her eyes reflecting the endless blue of the sky, and knew his lonely prayers had been answered, just not in the way he had expected. He hadn't received a simple bride, he had found a partner, a warrior, the other half of his soul. And as he held her, feeling the faint flutter of their child's life, he understood that their love story was the richest treasure the West had to offer. And so they lived, not just as survivors, but as pioneers of a different sort, cultivating not just the land, but a love that was as wild, as resilient, and as beautiful as the prairie itself. Their quiet ranch, once a place of solitude, became a beacon of hope, a testament to the fact that sometimes the most profound journeys begin with a simple, quiet declaration, "You're coming with me."